Hello, it's the Great Canadian Bagel here, coming to you with the final Alberta election update. Now, as of the time that you're viewing this, this will be Election Day in Alberta, May 29th. Later tonight, we will be seeing what appears to be Danielle Smith coming with a solid or possibly even decisive victory, depending on how you want to call it. I'm more of the opinion that this is decisive, but we will be getting into that later. But let us look. Where are we in the forecast? Well, as we see here, this is my forecast if the UCP follows the performance of the UCP in 2019 and the Wild Rose Party before that. And this is kind of what you get. 51 to 36, about a 5.5 point lead in popular vote. There's a couple of very close ridings. What are their names? Morvenville, St. Albert, right up here, and the other one is in Calgary, Beddington, down here. So 53 to 34 is definitely within reason. Would not be a stretch. And the next step of 55 to 32 with Lethbridge West and Banff-Kanaskas is also within reason. In fact, if we go all the way to this scenario, and this is basically the best case scenario for the UCP. This would be if the UCP tracks the UCP in 2019 and the Progressive Conservative Party before them. In other words, the Progressive Conservatives prior to the mergers of the parties overperformed polling consistently almost every election. The Wild Rose was more flat. Now, even in this projection, something like 60 to 27 or 62 to 25 is perfectly reasonable. We could easily and reasonably see in the best case scenario for the UCP, in this scenario, only one seat loss. If that happened, if I am wrong in this regard and the UCP actually overperforms 62 to 25, and that would likely be like 55 to like 40-ish% in the popular vote, that is a complete and total win. Losing a single seat after 4 years of government, with all the chaos and nonsense that has happened since then, would be an utter rejection of the NDP. Is it going to happen? Probably not. That's not the forecast, obviously. But it is within reason. We look on the other side, in this scenario, what is the best the NDP could reasonably hope for? And really, it's just Calgary Cross here, Banff-Kanaskas, and Lethbridge East, so 33 to 54. We hop back over to this one. What is the best case for the NDP? Well, it's 40 to 47. Picking up Calgary Edgemont, Calgary Foothills, Calgary North, and finally Strathcona Sherwood Park right here. That's basically their best case scenario in this scenario. Now, we have a third unofficial scenario, which I've not made a map for because it completely rejects my methodology, which I don't consider. I think it's invalid. This methodology this scenario, this result would be if I do not do any polling error correction at all, which would be silly. There's always polling error. Most of the time, it's small, 1-2% range. But if you're talking about an election where the NDP are 2 points overpolled, that's a big deal. That means that the NDP are going to perform a lot better than otherwise they would. But if we do no correction, then we get 43 UCP to 44 NDP. Oh, that's the model. We don't want to do that. And popular vote-wise, it is 48.5 UCP to 49 NDP. It is a very extremely narrow win. However, I reject this scenario because I don't think it's valid to not consider polling error. Because the other thing to keep in mind with polling error is some firms are bad. I'm using some data. I don't exclude many firms. I really only just exclude Ecos at this point. Oh, and Innovative too. I exclude Innovative usually. But most other firms I take, and not all firms are good. And sometimes firms are just wrong, and some areas are hard to pull. Alberta's one of them. Alberta has a tendency to be underpolled for the right and overpolled for the left, both federally and provincially. This is a decades-long trend. Will it happen tomorrow? I don't know. But in every single election I've covered, for the most part, except the US 2022, the unadjusted correction outperformed. And in 2022 in the US, there was some issues in model assumptions because my model assumptions are calibrated for Canada, not the US. In the US, I think I really need to consider fundraising in my model. And if I did that, I think it would work better. But we're not talking about the US today. We are talking about Canada. And Alberta, more specifically. Now let us look at the trend we have seen thus far. So right now, since the last update on the 22nd of May, the UCP is actually up 0.8, the NDP is down 0.6, and the Alberta Party is actually down 0.2. The Alberta Party is just collapsing. If you look at this, they got 9% in 2015, give or take. These are slightly different numbers because this is calculated if turnout is even across regions, and turnout wasn't. It never is. But that's neither here nor there. It doesn't particularly matter. It's close enough. So they went from 9% to 0.4. And they get 0.4 in either scenario. The Alberta Party is just completely collapsed. If we look in the Wild Rose scenario over here, we get the same thing, about 0.9 gain, NDP down about 0.6, and Alberta Party down 0.2. Big losses all around for other. And for the record here, Wild Rose Independence Party being listed here is actually just other right. So like the Solidarity Movement, Wild Rose Independence, all the Alberta Independence Party. Like there's like a dozen of these parties. I've all grouped them together in the polling and in candidates because they're all so small that it's whatever. This is more to get a gauge of how strong right opposition is, and it's not. Alberta is pretty much at this point in either scenario consolidated into a two-party system. Will it stay this way? We'll get to that. Now, there's some things we need to consider here about what has happened this election. If we scroll down here, from April 30th to now, if we look at my model, nothing's changed. April 30th, May 29th. We are talking about dismal place changes in vote share. We go to seats. We are talking about the UCP gaining one seat. One. Net, that is. Nothing. This entire campaign hasn't done anything. or my model's completely bullshit. I'm leaning towards the campaign on net changed nothing. Why might that be? Why would the campaign do nothing? Easy. This hasn't been a month-long campaign. We haven't been in campaign since May 1st. We've been in a campaign since October, when Smith won the leadership race. That's actually when the 2023 Alberta provincial election started. And if we scroll all the way back then, before I even had this model, the Wild Rose model, we just have the PC model. We see here, this is when Smith becomes leader. And we have 48 to 38, and there's some change from the other parties. And what has happened since then? Well, the other parties have all collapsed. They're basically gone. They don't exist. If we look at the change here to there, the UCP's up about 7 points. And actually, let's do this, make it a bit easier. The UCP is up about 7 points. The other right is down 5. The Alberta Party is down 4. And other is down, other/libs together are down 3. Yes, 3. So, what has happened? Well, it looks like about half of the Alberta Party voters broke UCP, about half broke NDP. 3 points worth of other/lib broke NDP, and 5 points of other right broke UCP. Is that literally what happened? I don't know. I can't prove that to you, but that is what the math appears to be. And that's why I say the election started around here. And the election was the NDP and the UCP, the NDP and the UCP fighting each other. And these were the available voters. This was up for grabs. These were the undecideds, really. And in the end, the undecideds, we had, let's say, 12% of undecideds. And they broke UCP 7-5. The NDP needed to break them 11-1. They didn't do it. That's the election. And if you look at all these numbers, they really track. You look at Calgary, what happened? Basically that. 5 points other right, 2 points Alberta Party. You get that, that's 7 points, and then you're at basically within the margin of error of what they're currently sitting in Calgary. Same thing with NDP. This appears to be what has happened the entire election. We have had the longest election campaign in Canadian history. Not necessarily Canadian history, but in modern history. This is the longest campaign, being October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May. 8 months? 8-month campaign? Very long time. And if we go back here and we go all the way back to October 18th, I had 58.29. Now, December 10th, I had 57.30. The only difference between this projection and my currency projection is there's one less Edmonton seat for the UCP, but one more rural seat. Everything else is the same. Oh, pardon me. It's one less Calgary seat, not one less Edmonton seat. That's the only thing that has happened. There's been a few seat changes, but the overall thing is 57-30 if we go by the PC assumptions. We don't have the Wild Rose assumptions back then. I didn't have the model then. That was a new addition. But if we go back to the earliest version of it, March 12th, and we look at it today, it's basically the same with one more rural seat, one more Edmonton seat, and 2 less Calgary seats for the UCP. That's where we're at. Nothing has changed. And if we look at this, and we look at tomorrow, and we're expecting what is the vote going to look like? And I will not say to you today that everyone who voted UCP in 2019 is voting UCP again. We have very good reason to believe about 10%, give or take, have defected. Say la vie. That's elections. But it appears going in tomorrow, we should expect about 1 million UCP votes and about 700,000 NDP votes. Maybe if we stretch it, the NDP could be getting in the realm of 800,000 votes. And based off of advanced polls turnout and polls asking people who are going to vote, we should really expect about the same number of actual voters, maybe plus or minus a couple 100,000. But we should really expect about the same vote breakdown. About 1 million UCP, about 700 to 800,000 NDP. That's what it's looking like it's going to be tomorrow. The longest election campaign in modern history in Canada. And really nothing changed. If the UCP walks away with about 1 million votes, which is what I expect they're going to be doing, nothing changed. They didn't lose voters. All of the NDP potential gains are really not NDP gains from the use. I'm going to phrase this. That's bad phrasing. All of the NDP gains aren't necessarily new voters or the net result of defection, but more of the consolidation of the center left. Yes, there's some UCP defections to the NDP. That's a given. And some of the Alberta Party, the other right, the Liberals, others defected Conservative. That happened. This is objectively true. But the net result is the NDP has basically monopolized the opposition right now. Whereas the opposition prior, there was, give or take, what is the math? 12% voted for other parties. Now we're looking at maybe, if we're lucky, 3%, 2%. That's the election. Now, why? Why did this go like this? Why did the entire campaign do nothing? We had 30 days of active, real election campaigns. We had big scandals, huge scandals. We had proposals, money being showered on people. And nothing. Nothing happened. The most chaotic, most eventful provincial election, the entire campaign period boiled down to nothing. We look at some Abacus research polls that have come out. We had some at the beginning of the campaign, and there have been one as of Saturday as a recording. And that was the field dates, that I should say. And Smith has the same approval in both polls. That tells you what happened. Notably as well, the same approval. Why? How, after this entire election, 30 days of active campaigning and 7 months prior of mostly campaigning, nothing changed. The environment is the same. Well, you shouldn't be surprised. I've been saying this, or a variant of this, the entire time. This election was basically down to the UCP campaigned on doing some things, and the NDP campaigned on slandering and defaming Danielle Smith. in 2023, attack ads really don't work. What attack ads are good at, and what they've always been good at, and people, a lot of political strategists, a lot of pundits confuse this with them being good. They're not. But what attack ads are good at is taking someone who has no name recognition and painting them negatively. If you have high name recognition, attack ads literally don't do anything. All they do is polarize the electorate. Because people who already know you and like you will be angry that you are attacking them. And people who already know the person and don't like them are just going to be like, you're preaching to the choir. They already don't like the person. And this is further exacerbated that in 2023, we have online video. Some of the places like YouTube and Twitter are full of news, full of video. People can go on them every single day. You have other social media platforms as well on top of those. So YouTube and Twitter are two of the most common in Canada. People go on every single day. They can see every single statement. They can watch every single video. If you see an ad on TV and it's the NDP saying that, look, Smith said she wants to privatize healthcare, you'd be like, really? You can go and watch the video yourself, the original clip, with very little effort. And you can go watch the original clip and you will see the context and you'll be like, oh, she wants a French-style healthcare system. Now, Joe Blow voter might not know that this is the French healthcare system, but saying you want private management but publicly funded isn't scary to people. In my understanding, in my experience, most people like that idea. It's comfortable. Because people don't actually really care about how this healthcare system is run. They just want to pay for it. If you're telling them that this is going to make it more efficient, but they still don't have to pay for it, they're all ears. They don't care. They just don't want to pay for it. And that's the crux of this campaign. That's the crux of the entire election. The NDP went all in on a pair of twos and lost. That's what it was. That's the entire election. They gambled that Smith was so unlikable, that she was so terrible, she was so radical that Albertans could just not vote for her. And that at least, they would not vote at all. So the NDP could turn out their voters and they would win by default. That was their campaign. But by making a campaign like that, you set the expectation that Smith is a crazy, radical, unhinged person. But then voters see what she's trying to do. She wants to fund daycare. I think daycare is a terrible policy, but is that unhinged? She wants to fund a new arena for Calgary. Is that unhinged? She wants to fund rehab centers. Is that unhinged? What about this? Of the core planks of her campaign, the core things she said, what about that is radical or out there? Or even, frankly, remotely particularly interesting other than policy nerds such as myself or other pundits? Or perhaps the other most radical thing she's saying, that she wants to cut taxes on the lowest income earners. Is that radical? Is lowering taxes on the poor really a crazy idea? Is that bad? Of course not. So you have this incoherent messaging from the NDP that she's so radical, she's unhinged, she's a terrible person. Look at all these terrible, evil things she says. And then people look at what her campaign is and what she's promising to do, and it's milquetoast generic policy ideas, many of which are good ideas. But they're not exciting ideas. They're not radical ideas. They're not even divisive ideas. There wasn't even a wedge issue deployed at all. The most wedged issue was when the NDP made the self-own of going to raise corporate taxes by either 3%, or 3 percentage points, I should say, or 38%, depending on how you want to phrase it. That was the biggest wedge issue. That was the biggest self-own the NDP did. And the final blow in the coffin here, there was really two, but the big blow in the coffin was the debate. Hundreds of thousands of Albertans tuned in to watch this debate. And when they tuned in and they watched it, what did they see? They saw Notley and Smith. And Smith did a great job. She looked normal. She looked like a regular person. And she's supposed to be unhinged, hateful, radical, terrible person. And she just looks like a normal person. The debate was when the NDP campaign died. And then a week later, when the Calgary government, city council, decided to cancel Canada Day fireworks, that's when they just put the train in high gear for the UCP. I can't tell you the exact impact of that one decision, but I can tell you it definitely is going to increase conservative turnout, because that is a really offensive move to a conservative perspective. We're not celebrating Canada Day? What is this? It's ridiculous. So then you vote to get your anger out. That's how this works. That's how democracy works. So in a lot of ways, the NDP did a campaign set for like 1993. And the UCP ran a campaign for 2023. And no matter what the polls looked like last year, that's all that mattered. In fact, I think any human who could breathe, who had high name recognition, and could do a debate performance that was okay, probably would have walked over the NDP on this. You could pick your most radical MP in the entire UCP, the most radical person. As long as they can come across as a normal human on a debate stage, like not a frothing, like, radical or whatever, they probably could have walked over the NDP in this election. Because the campaign paradigms are 30 years apart. Was it always guaranteed? No, and there's still technically a path to victory. Like I said, if the polls are correct, the NDP should technically win, barely. But they're never correct. Even the best of elections, they're not right. 2023 or 2021's conservative or better election, they were wrong. 2019, they were wrong. 2019 Alberta, they were wrong. 2015 Alberta, they were still wrong. They're very close. They're useful. You can't disregard the polls. They allow you to make these projections. But they systemically underestimate the Conservatives in pretty much every election in Canada. The only election, quote-unquote, where the Conservatives were, quote-unquote, or the more conservative party was, quote-unquote, not underestimated, was 2012 in Alberta. But the thing I will say with that is, I think it's the mainstream Conservative Party that's underestimated. And the fringe ones get overestimated, as we saw the People's Party in 2021. There is I think, a shy Tory factor for the mainstream Conservatives, and there is a zealot factor for the other ones where they are more likely to respond to polls. And the mainstream Conservatives are less likely to respond to polls or exit the surveys early. There's lots of speculations for why this might be, but there's systemic underpolling of Conservatives in Canada. It's every single election. Quebec 2022, Ontario 2022. Pick an election. Almost every single one. PEI last month. Systemic underpolling. King's party overperformed by 5 percentage points. Going from 50 to 55 is a huge deal. That's a big miss. No one talked about it because who cares when you get the person still won. But it's still a huge miss. And those firms who got that huge miss are still polling in Alberta. And they had a huge miss in 2019. And a huge miss in the other election in 2019. And a huge miss in the other election in 2021. How huge? Not that huge, but it's still a miss. They miss all the time. This is not to denigrate pollsters. This is a hard job. And I think there are people who intentionally fuck with them, and there are people who don't answer properly, or they just don't answer at all. And that's what it is. If you can't get the people in your sample, you don't know. That's what it is. But because of this, there's not really been a chance. The only hope the NDP have is that the polls, for once, are completely accurate. The NDP are banking on the Conservatives, who are the most underpolled, and the NDP, which is the most overpolled party, buck that trend at the same time. That seems extremely unlikely. And if they only partially buck that trend, like this one, this is basically the UCP is not underpolled at all in this, by the way. It's just the NDP being overpolled, being corrected for. That's what you get. It's a stomp. 51 to 36 is a stomp. Now you might think, well, they're still losing 12 seats. That seems like a big loss, Bagel. Well, it's not. It's really not. We bring it again. Where were we in 2023 before Kenny resigned? Now we could argue maybe Kenny could have done this too. Maybe he would end up winning in the end. I don't know. I don't deal in counterfactuals. We don't really know. Though, by Abacus's polling, he's still not particularly popular in Alberta, so I don't think so. But we don't know. This time last year, May, Ledger poll, UCP +2. Think HQ, April, NDP +12. Main Street, March, NDP +3. Even in September, UCP +6 from Angus Reid. And then you look now, you go all the way back up here. And you go at the most recent Angus Reid poll. UCP +8. The most recent one. You look at the most recent Main Street poll and UCP +2. You go all the way back to this one. NDP +3. Now, the small parties have more vote share in these, but the overall trend is the same. The NDP, if these polls, even if you take these polls as is, and you do my polling error correction, this should be an NDP win, these polls, before Kenny resigns. So even if the polls are overestimating the NDP and underestimating the UCP, last year, in 2022, the NDP wins. I would say probably 46 to 41, let's say. I haven't done the math, but let's say about that. And now, and I think the best case scenario for the NDP were 51-36. They've lost 10 seats. Minimum. They could be up as high as 15, 16 seats. It's basically a total rout. This is the most decisive victory the UCP probably could have. Or, sorry, I forgot to switch to the other map. Sorry, it's this one. If this is the result, this is about the most decisive victory the UCP could pull here. Like, realistically speaking. Like, yes, I know I said earlier 62 to 25 is not outside of the ballpark if you change 2 percentage points. But, like, let's be honest here. Let's be honest. I don't think the polls are that wrong. That'd be ridiculous. That would be That would be one of the worst polling misses in history. But as is, there's nothing. There's no hope here for the NDP. It's over. Now, what happens if I'm wrong tomorrow and the NDP pull out a surprise win? Well, what is there to say? The polls must have been right. They smartened up. And if I actually want to be wrong tomorrow. Now, I want Smith to win. Don't get me wrong. But I want to be wrong tomorrow. Because I want to be able to look at the polling industry in Canada and say, they finally figured out how to poll Alberta. If I'm wrong, I'll be happy. I don't like assuming the polls are wrong and having to correct for them. But they always are. They always are. 2021 Nova Scotia. No poll, there wasn't many polls, but no poll had the PCs winning. The PCs won a landslide. They couldn't have won harder. They won basically every single seat they could reasonably win. Now, they're likely going to win more seats if we see another election in 2 years. And nothing changes. Which is crazy. This is not about Nova Scotia. This election, I think, is the death knell of attack ads. And the ultimate vindication of me saying you have to campaign on things. You can't campaign off of how the other person is terrible. You have to campaign on why you should vote for me. If you do anything less, you lose. Or at least, you underperform what you could have. Could the NDP ever have won this election? I don't know. The NDP campaign, hired me as an advisor, and I willingly took the job, and I convinced them that they should stop attacking Smith, and they should run a campaign focused on positive, happy vision for Alberta and why it's going to be better. Could they have ever won? I don't think so. I genuinely don't think the NDP had any path here other than the Conservatives just not voting. And that was a very unlikely path. Now, it could still happen, but it seems extremely unlikely. In fact, of all the major people who do models, 338, Too Close to Call, even Main Street's own model, no one is forecasting the NDP winning. People saying, there's percent chance they could win. We all know how I feel about percent chances. They're silly. You can't calibrate that. You can do some stats math and it'll spit out a percentage. I'm not saying that people like Philip Fournier or Brian Burgett are calculating their math wrong. I'm sure their math is correct. I just reject the idea that you can use stats in this regard. Because you can't validate it. You don't know if your you don't know if the assumptions behind your model are creating the right probabilistic model to use stats on. But this is getting really too nitty-gritty. That's what it is, right? Did they ever? I don't think they ever had a path. And the reason why, and it really boils down to the oil industry. The oil industry is why Alberta's prosperous. It's why the median income in Alberta is so high. It's why Alberta can have such ridiculously high spending per capita and such ridiculously low taxes per capita. They're the least taxed jurisdiction in Canada and have the highest spending per capita in Canada. That is literally only possible because of the oil industry. They have the highest wages in Canada. Again, only because of oil. Maybe you could throw mining in there too, but it's really oil. It's oil. And the NDP are ideologically hell-bent on destroying the oil industry. They do not care one iota. They pretend otherwise. They pretend that, oh, we're going to do a just transition or whatever euphemism they're using now. They don't care. They don't like the oil industry. They want to destroy it. And that's why this election probably was never going to be competitive. As long as the UCP ran someone with a pulse and wasn't just some lunatic, which none of the people in their leadership race were lunatics, and they all had a pulse, I don't think there was ever a chance. The NDP just want to destroy the one thing Alberta has going for it. The one thing. And that was never going to fly. And when this election happens tomorrow, and if I'm correct and everyone else is right, because the thing to keep in mind too is, sure, 338 is 23% chance of the NDP winning, but if it's my model, too close to call, 338, other people on Twitter who have actual, or like Main Street and other big names that you might not know, but whatever. I'm not going to go into the nerdy of polling models. If you cross-reference all our models and they're all saying the same thing, give or take, then the percent chance drops dramatically. What are the odds that all of these different methodologies all are wrong? Very low. They never had a chance, though. And they can't have a chance. And when Notley probably resigns after this, because let's be honest, she is a good leader for the party. She has done a good job as the leader of the NDP in Alberta. But she's kind of old. Does she really want to contest an election at 62? Does the NDP want to run someone who has lost 2 consecutive elections? Especially as the NDP keeps moving leftward. And yes, Notley has moved leftward with the party, but how much further left will she move? Who knows? I think it's likely she resigns, especially if she gets spanked like this scenario I have here. And then I think we are going to see 10, 15 years of the UCP just dominating, because I think the NDP are going to continue nominating more radical anti-oil people. People completely bought into climate change hysteria who think the world is going to end in 20 years or whatever number they're picking now. And if we don't just stop oil, we're all going to die. Irrespective of the fact that if we stopped oil production, we're all dead anyways. So who cares? Oh, well, the world's 2 degrees colder, but everyone died of starvation. Who cares? Who cares? That's dumb. That's what it is. They're running a platform. They're running an ideology that is predicated on destroying the prosperity of this jurisdiction. And barring flukes like 2015, I don't think it's ever going to win, at least until they change or the jurisdiction is no longer benefiting from oil prosperity. I think them changing is more likely. Give it 10, 15 years. But with that, I bid you adieu. If you liked the video, do all the YouTube things, like, share, subscribe, comment below what you think. If I think I'm crazy, if you think I'm wrong, think something looks stupid, I don't know. I will be doing a live stream later tonight on election coverage. I don't know when I'm starting, because I don't actually know when the election is happening, because I did not think to look this up. I've been too busy this weekend. But eventually, sometime, look at YouTube, I don't know. And tagged below, I have a poll that I've been doing for Canadian political surveys. In a pinned comment, you should fill it out if you have not already, and you can send it to anyone you know who is Canadian who might want to do it. They are welcome. But with that, I bid you all adieu, and I will see you later today.